So welcome to this De-Stress Your Life webinar. My name's Kim Knight from kimknighthealth.com. And what we're looking at today is, I'm going to be sharing quite a lot of stuff, but one of the main things I'm going to be sharing is my 5-step method for eradicating stress. And I'm really excited because this is the first time ever that I've done this in a public way with a group. I've been teaching this for years with clients, but this is the first time I'm bringing it more out to the public as a separate program as well, because it really is, there's just so much in it that this is enough to keep one occupied for quite a while. So the agenda today is that, first of all, we're going to do a quick stress check. And I don't want this just to be me talking. I'm actually going to be having you thinking and feeling and checking in with yourself during this webinar. And then I'm going to share very briefly my journey of de-addiction to stress, because it is an addiction and we have to de-addict ourselves. And I feel it's probably one of the hardest things to de-addict ourselves from. And then I'm going to be sharing a little bit about the consequences of when we're stressed. And I want to share two specific things, which is what happens at birth if we have birth trauma and how that creates a stress response in the body, and how important the first 7 years of life are for this stress habit. And then I'm going to be sharing the steps of my 5-step Eradicate stress method. And then there's going to be an invitation if you want to go on a journey with me to really deep dive into transforming stress to a much deeper level than what you would have been doing on the 12-day program. And then we'll have time for questions at the end, and some of the questions that you put in the Facebook group, I will be answering those at that point. So I just invite you to close your eyes and just tune in. How do you feel right now? Just tuning in. Because it's quite hard sometimes not to tune into ourselves, or to be able to tune into ourselves without going inside and closing our eyes, bringing our attention inwards. And just in your own way, because you know how you are inside, you know what feels stressed, you know what feels relaxed, although actually for many of us we've never actually really truly experienced what relaxation is. But how would you rate your stress levels right now? And I do invite you to keep your eyes closed as you're doing this. And would you say that you're down at 0 and you're just totally, absolutely calm? Just very still inside, which means that your mind would be very still. There'd be no thoughts. Your body feels very relaxed. Would you say it's mediocre? Or would you say, actually, I'm really stressed and I just feel this constant state of anxiety and nervous tension and stress? So there's no judgment here. It's just about getting real with where you are, and just give yourself a rating out of 10. So 0 would be I'm super calm, and 10 would be I'm super stressed. And you could have anything in between that. And then still with your eyes closed, I want you to ask yourself, what is this costing me? What is the toll? What effect is this stress, being like this, feeling like this, having on my life? What effect is it having on my health? And bear in mind that any health issues are underpinned by stress. And I'm going to share that on my stress story in a minute, what I mean by that, because there are layers and layers of stress. So what is the toll in your health? And what is the toll perhaps on your career? How does it affect your career? How does it affect your ability to have fun, your hobbies, your enjoyment? How is it affecting your success, including financial success? Because stress really affects everything. And now I want you to see, well, where would I like to be on that scale of 0 to 10? Where do I want to sit compared to where I am now, and see if there's a difference? And just notice. We're just looking, investigating. And then I want you to ask yourself, how much do I really, really want this? How much do I want to get from A to B? Because the problem with us humans is that we can either be aware or semi-aware, or, well, we can be in 3 stages. We can be unaware, semi-aware, or fully aware. But even if we're at any of those stages, we can still actually not do what we need to do about it. And it's actually the action that is actually going to make the difference. And I'm going to share how I did that for myself as well. So also, just one more question, still with your eyes closed. If you're not in the place you want to be right now as far as stress, health, happiness, etc., as far as you know right now, what are the roadblocks? Just as far as what you know right now. And just see what comes to mind. It's the interesting thing and the rather frustrating thing about roadblocks is that often we don't know what they are, or we might sort of know what they are but not know how to deal with them. So one of the key things for change and healing is awareness, is understanding more what we need to do and also what is blocking us, first of all. So we're going to be talking a little bit about that today as well. But just be aware of what you think at the moment, and then at the end of this webinar, perhaps you may have some more clues as to any of these roadblocks. So you might want to open your eyes now. And I just want to share a few of the main roadblocks that I find are the truth, or why we're not where we want to be. And today we're talking about stress, but we could really be talking about anything in our life, is that we don't have a roadmap. We don't have a map, we don't have a compass. We know where we are, but we don't know totally where we want to go, and we don't know how to get to where we want to go. And the interesting thing is, often with human beings, is that when we have a problem, we tend to focus a lot on the problem, but not enough on the solution. And part of that is because we don't know what the solution is. So it's so important that we have a roadmap, which is what I'm going to be sharing today. I'm absolutely going to be giving you the roadmap today. And as I said, I'm really excited about this because it's taken me many years to work out this roadmap and all the pieces. And it's like there are 5 roads, which is why I call it my 5-step method. And we need a map and a compass. Often also we don't have the tools and the strategies. We just don't know exactly what to do, what tool to pull out of the toolbox to deal with the problem. And that is what I have gathered over many, many years, is lots and lots of tools and strategies, which I love to teach people to use themselves. So my big thing is giving these tools and strategies to people so that they become really, really self-masterful. And that excites me. I don't fix people. I don't heal people. I show people how to heal themselves. And that really excites me. And it is the future of healthcare. But not many people are doing it at the moment. And of course, in our medical system at the moment, it's really not much about self-help and self-mastery. It's about, here's a pill, let's mask the symptoms, and that'll sort it. But it's not sorting it at all, although it might be useful as an interim. The next thing is we don't have what I call the full picture. There can be missing pieces to the puzzle. Now, there's only 4 pieces in this puzzle here on the screen. But imagine that you've got a jigsaw puzzle and it's probably got 100 or 200 pieces, and many of those pieces are not on the table. And so there are these huge gaps, and you're only getting little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle. But if you've only got little pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, you can't see the picture. And I don't know about you, but I used to love doing jigsaw puzzles when I was a kid. I probably should still do them now, actually, because they're quite a fun thing to do. But, you know, when you start off and you've got all those bits on the table and you're trying to work out where to start, and nothing, you know, you can't see anything, nothing makes sense. And then as you put the pieces together, you get to see the whole picture. And the next thing is going it alone. Really, really hard when we've got a problem that we're really stuck on to sort it out by ourselves. We all need help. And one of the reasons for this is that we have blind spots. We can't see our stuff. I need help with my stuff. And I've had lots of help with my stuff. Lots and lots and lots. We can't see our stuff by ourselves, and we think we can often, but we can't. And so we need guidance and support. And often the journey can look like this, right? And often we want it to be a straight line. And this is very common for the mind to think, well, I just want to go from A to B, and I want it to be as simple and as quick as possible. But the problem is, the reality is that this is more like what the journey is. It's up and down and all over the place. So this was very much my journey. So I know that some of you have heard some of my story, but for the sake of whoever is going to be listening to this webinar later, I'll just give a brief overview of the whole story. And I was diagnosed with clinical depression when I was 28, and I'd never heard of the word. I had no idea what it meant. And slowly I started to find out that it meant that I actually wasn't as happy as I could be. And I started to see a counselor, and that started for the first time, you know, that prompted me for the first time to look inside me, to look inside my mind, my emotions. I'd never done that before. And that started opening up a can of worms, really, as often this work can do as we start to go internal. And things got worse, and I ended up in hospital with very severe depression. But I was only there a couple of weeks, and I came out of that. And really, I'd had quite an in-depth transformational experience while I was in the hospital. I didn't really understand what had happened until many years later. And really what had happened was I'd had a transformation of consciousness. Literally, my old ways of thinking and my old paradigm of what is life about and who am I, it just crumbled. And it made way for a new me. And the way I liken it is that if you have an old skyscraper, an old building, and you want to build a brand new skyscraper, you have to demolish the old one first. And so what happened to me when I was in the hospital was that basically my mind was being demolished, and all my old belief systems and paradigm were being demolished. But I didn't know it at the time. I just knew that I couldn't even think, I couldn't read, I couldn't watch TV. It was a very strange experience. And I came out of that, and I started to put myself back together. And soon after that, I came over to New Zealand, and I thought I was getting my life together, although I went through then going through a very abusive relationship and getting myself out of that relationship. And then a few years later, I thought I was on track and following my dream, and I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. I just walked into work one day after months and months and months of getting more and more tired, quit my job, and was diagnosed with chronic fatigue. And I spent the next 5 years searching for answers. Of course, I went to the doctor, and I got the usual very common line of, well, we don't know what causes it, and there aren't any solutions, so go home and rest. I went home and sat on my couch for 3 months, and just at complete loss as to what to do. And one day I just decided that I wasn't going to stay. You know, I could imagine that if nothing changed, I was going to stay like that for the rest of my life, which was the reality. And so I made a decision that day, and I made a decision that I was going to find an answer, even though I had no idea how. I just made an internal decision. And I cannot stress how essential making that decision is if you want to get a change in your life. That is the first step. It is the absolute first step And when I work with people, that is the only decision they have to make before they work with me. They don't need to have any solutions, any answers. They just need to know, I want to be well, I want to be different, I want something to change in my life, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes. So I made that decision that day. And I didn't really realize until later how important that decision was. And as a result of making that decision, I started to attract to myself and find ways to different forms of healing. And I started trying different natural therapies and going to see many, many different therapists. And I totted up over that 5-year period, or added up, that it was about 140 different therapies that I tried, but nothing really seemed to be working. It was like I knew I was on the right track, and some days I might feel a bit better, but overall there just wasn't really progression. And I'd keep finding myself back in bed. And and then at the same time, I was starting to really study some of these therapies in a very in-depth level, which eventually led to me being trained professionally in some of them. Again, I was only doing it for myself at the time. Even though I wasn't at the time really, it seemed like anyway, making much progress, although at a fundamental level there was change going on, but it wasn't showing up in terms of a change in symptoms and a reduction in a reduction in fatigue. So after 5 years of this, one day I was crashed again, lying in bed, totally exhausted, unable to move. And I just asked myself, what would I do if I only had a few months to live? Because I was really starting to wonder, would I ever get better? And this again is quite a common thought. I'm sure that, some of you may be able to relate to this, to think, will I ever get better? And I made a decision that I was going to travel the world while I still could travel, because what if I didn't get better, or even worse, if I died? And so I sold my house and I set off around the world, even though I was still ill, and I would crash every so often, and I just had to go slowly. I was still searching though. I was still searching. And at the end of that trip, I found the answer. And the answer was all about the connection between emotions and stress and illness. But mainly at that point, it was more emotions. And so I spent the next 5 years I spent the next 5 years really delving into the topic of emotions and how to clear emotions, because what I learned was that emotions are energy, and that emotional energy can get blocked. And when that emotional energy gets blocked, it creates huge fatigue. So what I learned was my chronic fatigue was not a lack of energy, it was blocked energy. And that totally changed my paradigm in a second. So I went on this long journey, lots more training, lots more therapy, lots more application on myself of everything that I was learning, daily application. And slowly, my chronic fatigue started lifting. And after another 5 years, so now we're at a total of 10 years now, after 5 years, I could say that I was 95% better. And at that point, I then became aware that I was stressed. And it was the first time that I actually became aware consciously of the level of stress inside my body. And what I realized was that stress was like a foundation layer that sat underneath everything, and it sat underneath the emotions, and it sat underneath the symptoms. And finally, because I'd reduced the symptoms enough and I'd reduced the emotions enough, I suddenly became aware of the physical feeling of the stress inside my body. And I also became aware of how uncomfortable and unnatural that felt. And it was at that point that I started to think, oh my God, I'm going to really do myself some damage. Even though I, really healed myself 95% from chronic fatigue, I'm still actually, there's still something not right. And I need to get rid of this stress. And again, I made another commitment. I made another huge, super commitment to myself. And I decided that I was going to do whatever it took to identify why the stress was there and then clear it. And I had no idea at the time, just like when I had no idea at my initial decision, I'm going to get well, that it would take me 10 years. I also had no idea that it would take me another 3 years to really significantly reduce that stress to a point where I could say, I'm not really in that stress mode anymore. And so I'm going to be sharing in this 5-step method the things that I discovered that I needed to do and what I did. So I did that for 3 years, very consciously, every day, working on all these different avenues and approaches that I discovered I needed to address in order to reduce the stress. And finally, after 3 years, I could say, wow, I'm a significantly different person. And I'm just not that stress bunny that I used to be 3 years ago. And then, of course, it continues as well. You know, there's always work to be done. And I could still be much, much more calm and what we call calm, relaxed, and natural inside than I am now. But it's steps. It's layers and layers and layers and steps. So that is my journey of what I call de-addiction, because I realized that I was addicted to being stressed. And I'm going to talk later about how that addiction is set up. So what are the consequences of stress? Well, illness is one of them, because as I said, stress underpins illness. And Harvard University have said that at least 80% of all illness and disease is due to stress. And disease is dis-ease. And this constant state of stress really damages the body, and it literally shortens our life and effectively, ultimately, can kill us. So in the first 7 years, and I've spoken about this on the 12 days program, so I'm not going to go into detail about that because you've already got that. But essentially, this stress response, what I realized was it's set up in the first 7 years of life. And you can type into the chat box if you like, if you've noticed this yourself, if you've, discovered the same thing for yourself. But one day I remember sitting at home asking myself, why is it that I want to feel relaxed and I want to relax and I just want to do relaxing things and I just want to sit down and do nothing and I just want to read a book and just feel relaxed. But why is it that I just can't do it? I sit down for 2 minutes and then I just want to get up again. And I kept on asking myself the question, why? And the answer just finally popped into my head, and it was like, oh my God, it's actually safer for me unconsciously to be stressed. And it was the first time that I saw that. And this was during this 3-year period when I was really investigating the stress response. And I saw that unconsciously, because of the trauma that I experienced when I was growing up and just the environment, how I felt in my environment all the time, always being on eggshells, never really feeling okay, always awaiting maybe some punishment, some criticism, some judgment, whatever it was, just whatever was going on in the environment, my body was responding all the time as an infant and as a child. It was responding automatically by going into the stress response. And then it became a habit at an unconscious level. But of course, when we're very, very young, we don't know that we're setting up these habits because we're so young. And we don't do it, with our mind. We're doing it at a body physiological level. And it is completely connected to either needing to feel or not feeling physically safe and or emotionally safe. And that is where this perpetual stress response gets set up. So I don't know if you found that yourself. If you can relate, you can type in the chat box if you like and share your experience. But essentially, what it comes down to is survival. We just want to survive and stay alive. So it's actually very important. It's an important thing to happen, but the problem is that the initial situations are not being dealt with usually, and therefore the stress continues. And then also, even when we move later into our teenage years and our adult life, those initial situations have still not been dealt with, and that creates a problem. And we live in a universe of cause and effect. It's just how it is. So these habits become unconscious, but what happens is the stress and the fear that is stored and locked in our body, they then create what we call unconscious beliefs about life, such as I'm not safe, it's not safe to be me, I can't express my emotions, I'm not allowed to do what I want, whatever the beliefs are. And those beliefs then lead to behaviors because we behave from our beliefs. So if we have a belief, for example, that we're not good enough, then we'll never go, for example, we'll never allow ourselves to be successful, we'll never allow ourselves to be abundant, we will maybe never allow ourselves to have a happy relationship because deep down we have these unconscious limiting false beliefs. And so these beliefs and behaviors lead to results, and the results are the not good results are unhappiness and illness. Obviously good results would be happiness and health and success. And so we have this vicious cycle going on as a result of this stress response that's been set up at such an early age. Now the other thing that's really interesting is the birth trauma. When we're born, whatever experience we have at birth, it creates what's called a limbic imprint. And that limbic imprint gets sort of set as the default in our limbic brain, which is very, very connected with emotions and the stress and fight-flight response. And whatever that experience is at birth, it becomes our setting, if you like, of this is what life is. So for example, if a baby has a cesarean birth or a traumatic birth in some way, which again I did as well, and I had to go through and heal all of that, if we have a traumatic experience at birth, then the body again gets locked into this stress, fear, survival response at a very fundamental level, and we just don't feel safe. And that translates later in life to never really feeling safe, never feeling at ease, never being able to connect with people, and also a lot of financial issues, because in our society, finances equal survival. So if we have survival issues at a fundamental emotional, psychological level, then we're very often going to have financial issues. And that was certainly the case for me. So I've had to do a lot of work, and I'm still working on it, but I've done a lot of work to clear this deep survival stress response from birth, because it was really affecting my ability to run my business. And so this limbic imprint is very important. If we have a traumatic birth, it really just locks fear and stress into the cells. We've got to clear it. And then whatever happens in the first 18 months is very, very important, because we're just soaking up our environment. We're feeling everything in our environment. And then what happens in the first 7 years is very important, because we're just being programmed unconsciously in those first 7 years. And then everything gets set. And these patterns, these habits, stress habits, patterns of thinking, ways we deal with our emotions, it all gets set up in these first 7 years. And this is quite a big missing piece definitely for the medical community, although they are starting to catch on to, hey, the first 18 months of life are actually quite important. But they don't really understand the effect it has on illness later in life. Haven't yet connected the dots between if this happens in the first few years of life, then the propensity for being ill 10, 20, 30 years down the track is vastly different compared to if you have, a really happy, healthy, safe feeling childhood. So do put in the chat if this is making sense. And I'll just check the chat. Oops. Just 1 second. Just checking the chat to make sure not missing anything very important. Okay, so I'll come back to some of these questions later. That's great. Okay, I'll come back to that at all these, what you've put in there, I'm going to look at question time. I just need a drink. So here's a news flash. Stress is not natural. Most people, many people in our society are running around like, as they say, the proverbial chicken with the head cut off. And I think it's really good. You know, and my dad always says to me when he rings me, he says, "Are you busy?" And it's like, you know, it's really, really good if you're really, really busy. But actually, it's not so healthy because we live in a universe of yin and yang. Yin is stillness, yang is activity. And that yin-yang symbol, which you're probably quite familiar with, means that we need a balance of the two. And if we're continually stressed and busy and pushing ourselves and in this stress response, which means that physiologically our body is operating under pressure all the time, it can't tolerate it forever. It just can't. And that's when dis-ease starts to set in. And disease is the body's very intelligent response to things that need to be addressed, things that we're not doing that are healthy for us, or how we're damaging ourselves, because the body is literally saying through the symptoms, you're not doing things right and you need to change some stuff and you need to heal some stuff because I can't operate under these conditions anymore. So although stress may be seen as normal, it's not natural, and there's a difference. It's really important to understand the difference between what is normal and what is natural. And there's a lovely saying, what is natural has become unnatural, and what is unnatural has become natural. So stress is only designed to be experienced if we're in a real emergency, such as we're in a car crash, or we have to run out of a burning house, or we're just about to step off the curb and we notice that a bus is about to run us over. That is a real emergency. Or for people in war, for example, that's very stressful. Like continually being in a war zone, very, very stressful. But it all comes back down to threat against life. That is what the stress response is designed for. But the problem is most people are living in that state all of the time and they don't even know it. And I can't tell you how many friends I've got, colleagues who I meet, and they're so stressed, and I can see it, and they have no idea. They have no idea at all. So what is natural? If stress is being unnatural, what is natural? So we need to define what is natural, what is healthy. Natural means that our mind is very, very calm. Now, I've got a way to go on that one. I've experienced that. I've had months and weeks of experiencing that, where my mind has been completely still. There's been no thoughts, apart from when I need to use my mind for thoughts. But we should not be thinking all the time. Most people have no idea. They have never heard that concept before because they're thinking all the time. And it's only maybe if they go to your yoga class and they're lying down in Shavasana at the end, and they suddenly have a moment or 5 minutes of total stillness that they actually experience for the first time, what it really feels like to have a calm mind and a relaxed body. So our natural state and our goal is to have this very calm mind, to have the body very relaxed, and then we have a joy inside of us which emanates from within, which has nothing to do with anything external. It doesn't have anything to do with, you know, I've got a nice car or a nice house or a great job or a great partner. It's a joy that comes from inside. So I'd like you to rate, again, what is your state in general? Where would you rate yourself on that continuum? Are you totally calm, totally relaxed, totally joyful, or are you on the other end of the spectrum? And it's just a reality check. And again, I asked before, what is this costing you? So what is the solution? Because there's always a solution. If there's a problem, there's two sides to a coin, there's always a solution. The solution is to de-stress, is to learn how to de-stress. And the benefits of that are that we turn off this perpetual stress response, and then that means that we're turning on the relaxation response. And the relaxation response is innately the self-healing response. When we truly, and most people have never experienced this, even people who heal themselves from illness often have never truly experienced this very, very magical, miraculous self-healing response, because it's the place where miracles do happen, is that when we go into this relaxation response and we go into our natural state, everything shifts internally, and that is when healing can happen, because the body can then be in the right state to do the self-healing that it's always been able to do, but if we're in the stress response, it can't do it. So we really need to be in the relaxation response as much as possible for self-healing to happen. And that was one of my big sort of aha moments, over the years of learning everything that I've learned about what do we need to do to heal, is that when we truly get into this natural state, the body will do the healing and we don't even have to think about it. It just does it. So it's so important to know that our body, your body, is a self-healing machine. It is designed to self-heal. But if we keep stopping it from doing its job, it can never do its job properly. Obviously, also, we're going to start reversing disease, because disease is dis-ease. So if we take away the dis-ease, we take away the disease. And then what happens is we then get to be able to prevent illness. Touch wood, I hardly ever get ill. So we learn how to stop ourselves from getting ill again. And if we do get ill, we know what to do about it. So therefore we stay well. And this is true prevention. And they say, prevention is better than cure. And it's true. I mean, how many years and how much money do we spend, on our health once we've lost it? It's very expensive, very time consuming, very frustrating. And we increase our lifespan. And we're also going to, I didn't put it on there, but we're going to increase our enjoyment of life. We're also going to increase our success. We'll increase our financial success. Everything is going to get better, essentially. That is, that there are no downsides to de-stressing. It's all positive. We're also going to have more clarity and creativity, because when our mind is calm, that is when our genius kicks in. It's when we get in touch with our intuition, when we just have all these ideas, when we're in that calm state. And most people don't think that. They think that they have to be busy and rushing around to be effective and productive, and it's not true at all. We also get more time, because the interesting thing about being stressed, when we're stressed, the body thinks it has to do everything right now immediately in order to get away from the danger that it perceives it's in, which means it doesn't feel like it has any time. So when we're constantly stressed, we constantly think, I haven't got enough time. When we're relaxed, there's always time. There's always time, and things flow. We have better relationships because we're able to connect. We connect with ourselves, we connect with others, and we have more fun and life enjoyment. So basically, life gets better in every way. So let's move now to these 5 steps. Need another drink. Hope you're going all right. I'll just check the chat. Just put anything in the chat. Just let me know how you're going, if it's making sense. So the 5 steps to eradicate stress. Step 1, and for those of you who've been in the 12 days program, some of this, I would have touched on. But the first step is awareness. We have to become aware, first of all, of where we are and where we want to go and the gap in between, which we did at the start of this webinar. But one of the things that we really have to do in depth is we have to assess our whole life. We have to take, I can't think of the word, but we have to take an assessment. I call it, when I work with people, I call it a chronology, because it's a chronology of their life. But we really have to deep dive and really go in with a magnifying glass into our life and what has happened in our life and where did it all get set up. And in the program that I'm going to be running in the new year, we're going to be doing this together and getting really super clear, because I've got a really good formula for being able to do this. So we've got to assess, where was the setup? What are all the little bits that go together? And often there can be many bits that we're not aware of. There'll be bits that we are aware of, and then many bits that we're not aware of. And I say that because I always know that when I work with a client, the very first session we do, it's all about this setup, and there are always missing pieces. So if we go back to that jigsaw puzzle picture, usually when the client comes in the door, they may have, say it's a 100-piece puzzle, they may literally have 4 pieces of the puzzle. But by the time they go out the door an hour and a half later, they've probably got about 80 pieces of the puzzle, which means they can actually see the picture. There's only a few missing pieces, but basically they can see the picture. This is the first step. We also need to understand the physiological, physical, mental, emotional consequences of stress. In other words, what happens physiologically inside my body when my body is stressed, which means it's like, anatomy and physiology lesson. And I've talked a little bit about that in the 12 days program. Again, go much more in depth into that in the Eradicate stress program, and also my other emotional health transformation program and other programs. We've got to understand, how does stress really, really affect me physically, mentally, emotionally. We've just got to become super aware again, and we have to educate ourselves, because awareness is the key. And one of my favorite lines is, awareness is the key to healing, becoming aware of what we were previously unaware of, and then we have new choices. That is why awareness is always the first step. If we don't know what causes a problem, we don't know what to do to change it. And we have to become aware, much more aware, of what does stress feel like inside me, and what does calm feel like inside me. As I said, the first moment that I really had this literally like light bulb moment inside of me when I recognized I was stressed, it was just like literally a light went on, and I recognized and saw what I'd not seen before, but which had been really obvious before, but I'd never seen it. And because I became aware that I was actually stressed, and I hadn't been aware of it before, even though it was quite obvious, I then started to become aware of what it felt like, sensation-wise inside my body. And everybody feels things differently, but for me it just felt like this sort of constant state of, nervous tension, and sort of like almost like sometimes like a buzzing inside my body. And I just became aware that I didn't like it and I didn't want it anymore. And then we also have to have experiences of what does it feel like to feel calm, because we need to be able to differentiate and know that we want more of that than the other. And that's why we, in the 12 days program, I started introducing calming techniques, because then you can start to get a grasp of what does it feel like to actually not feel stressed. And then we have to understand this stress beliefs behavior cycle. We have to understand what are the beliefs. We have to work out what are the beliefs that I'm running inside of me. And the problem with beliefs is that they're mostly unconscious. But what are the beliefs that are running inside of me that then lead to the behaviors that I'm doing that are actually perpetuating the stress, even though I don't want to perpetuate it? And I have a lovely exercise in my Eradicate stress program where we go through to actually identify what are these beliefs that are there, that are sitting in the unconscious. So we have to do this. We have to really understand this stress beliefs behavior cycle. because we need to start changing it. So this is all step one. This is all awareness. And then, of course, we need to identify where we want to be instead. We've got to have that goal. We've got to make that decision. I want to be different. It's no good just knowing you're stressed and then carrying on and not making any changes, because nothing will change. We've got to make a commitment, make a decision, and then we move from there. So that's step one. And then step two, before we go to step two, so what I'd like you to do is, in terms of what I've just shared, which is understanding this physiological response inside of you, understanding how it really works, what happens inside of you, understanding the difference between stress and calm, understanding your stress beliefs behavior cycle, understanding this whole life setup. Where do you rate yourself in terms of this awareness? And again, no judgment, right? No judgment. We just need to know where we are on the map, because we can't get from Auckland to Wellington unless we know where we are on the map. So just rate, 0, I don't know at all. 10, I'm absolutely crushing it, I absolutely know everything, or somewhere in the middle. Then step two is more awareness, but also we have to start taking some action. And the first thing that we need to understand, this is very, very important, is that stress is always an inside job. Even though we can have lots of stressful life circumstances, it's our response to the circumstances that actually creates the stress. And what this means is that we start taking responsibility, even though, things have happened that were maybe not right, but I'm not saying that's not, the truth. But the more self-responsibility we can take, and the more we can recognize that every time we feel stress, it's actually happening inside our body, and therefore it's an inside job. The more we can take responsibility, the more we can change. If we constantly, for example, if people are constantly saying, it's my job's stressful. Yes, the job may be pressurized. It may be creating stress. There may be other reasons why the stress is being created, because it may be, again, how we're dealing with the job, how we're dealing with people at work, for example. But once we take responsibility, and responsibility, the word is the ability to respond. So rather than reacting, we learn how to respond. Responsibility. So the more self-responsibility we can take, actually, the more we can change things. The less responsibility we take, the more we sort of blame or put things on the outside, the less we'll have any ability or power to change anything. We also need to understand the difference between internal and external stressors. And this is the term that I've come up with. And I'm going to be giving some examples in a minute to make that very simple to understand. And we have to identify and log these internal, external stressors. We actually have to really start to observe ourselves. This requires a lot of self-awareness and self-observation. And this is not something that happens in 1 hour. It happens over days and months and weeks. We have to log everything that creates our body to go into this inside job stress. So now here's some examples of internal, external stress. So external is anything to do with anything outside your body that happens to you that you didn't plan to happen, right? For example, somebody owes you money. You feel frustrated and stressed maybe. Maybe there's things going on with your partner. Maybe there's things going on with a parent or a sibling. Maybe somebody's being verbally demeaning to you. Maybe your boss is asking you to work too many hours. These are things that are happening outside of your body to you, or let's just say they're happening, and we are responding to those things in a certain way. And those responses will always come from our habits and our patterns, which are set up in childhood. But either way, we're responding to those issues, those situations, those people. These are what I call external stressors, and we have to deal with them. We have to resolve and address all these external stressors, and we have to know how to deal with them as well. Then we have internal A. Internal A, because I've got internal A and B. Internal A are lifestyle habits. This is how we lead our life. For example, back-to-backing appointments, not taking time off, overachieving, pushing ourselves too hard. Nobody is forcing us to do any of these things. These are not things that are happening externally or from the external. They are all being driven by our internal habits. And these habits all go back to what happened in childhood and what was set up in childhood. But we have to identify these habits and we have to change them. So for example, I always used to back-to-back my appointments, and then I noticed, well, that keeps me stressed. And so I asked myself, well, what do I need to do to change that response? And I decided, well, I have to stop back-to-backing my appointments and I have to put time in between my appointments. So I made a change, and the result, because remember we live in a universe of cause and effect, the result was that I had less stress being generated inside my body because my body wasn't feeling so pressured. Internal B is our patterns of consciousness, our unconscious patterns of stress, fear from the past, our conditioning. And this is more difficult. So I'm going from, the easiest to the most difficult as in these three levels here. And this all takes time, as I said. This is not overnight. And please don't start going into overwhelm and stress about thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do all this? And thinking you have to do it all at once, because it doesn't work like that. And personally, what I've found with stress in particular is that it takes weeks and months, years to really fully address this. This is not an overnight change. But that doesn't mean we can't make significant progress in a short space of time, but it is a long-term project for sure. So if you reflect on your internal, external stressors, anything that's happening outside in your life that's coming into you, and all your own patterns, where would you rate yourself on the scale of being able to be masterful over this? Just again, 0 to 10. Just an intuitive rating. So the next step is more action and change. So now we're going from, awareness to action and change. And we actually have to start taking action on all these things that we've identified, just one thing at a time. We don't do it all at once, just one thing at a time. So we deal with stressful people, we deal with stressful life situations, and we deal with unfinished business. So that's the external stresses that we're dealing with. So again, you might like to rate, how much do I think I'm doing that already in my life right now? Am I dealing to the situations in my life that are creating stress from the outside? Because if you're not, the body will be sending stress because it needs to. It's telling you need to actually do something about it. Then we also have to, sort of step 3 still, we have to address our internal stressors. We have to start changing our lifestyle habits. We have to start changing what it is that we're doing that's damaging ourselves, that's creating this stress response inside, that's either triggering the stress response or perpetuating the stress response that's already on. So we're constantly going in and out of stress, but a lot of people are just sort of locked into it for a lot of the time. So we need to change these lifestyle habits, and we also need to make sure that we have what we call balanced life management, which means good time management, doing what is right for us, living in a balanced way so our body is actually happy with what we're doing. And then we also need to address these patterns of consciousness at a deeper level. We need to heal the past. We need to clear emotional trauma from ourselves. And usually this part here we definitely need help with, not something that we can usually do ourselves. With all the other stuff that I've mentioned so far, it's all stuff that we can absolutely do ourselves. We might need some tools and strategies to help do it, but we can actually do a lot of that without input or help from someone else. So again, how would you rate your ability right now to be changing and knowing and changing these lifestyle habits and behaviors and addressing your patterns of consciousness and healing the past and clearing trauma? Do you even know what these are? Are you addressing it? Because we need to do this. So give that a rating too. And the next thing, and by the way, I know I'm putting it in an order of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It doesn't mean that this comes last. It's just that I have to put it in an order logically for the slides. They can be done simultaneously. We must grow self-love, self-compassion, self-nourishment, self-value, self-worth, self-esteem, self-appreciation, self-confidence, all the self-words. We must grow these things. And often we need help with that because if we've never really experienced it, we don't know what it's like, we don't know how to do it, we don't know how to get from A to B, but we must do it. It must be done. This is very, very healing to be doing this. And this is what we naturally should have, but we didn't get often as a child. We didn't get the compassion, the love, the nourishment, the encouragement, the validation. We didn't get this stuff, and so therefore we didn't become it, we didn't create it. And then this drives our self-defeating, sabotaging, damaging behaviors because we don't feel worthy. And one of the bottom line root issues of people that I see again and again and again is that I don't feel good enough, I don't feel deserving, I'm not deserving of love, I don't deserve good things, and it just keeps coming back to I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy at a deep level. And some of that may be conscious, but a lot of it is unconscious, and we don't even realize how little we love ourselves. We must grow self-love and self-appreciation. Because if you think about it, how do you feel when somebody compliments you, right? And they say, oh, wow, that's a lovely dress, or jacket, if you're a guy, or, oh, wow, you did a great job, or wow, what a beautiful drawing you did, or what a beautiful photo you took, or you did a great job on that project. How does it feel inside you when you get complimented, right? It feels good, right? And it's interesting because the word encouragement comes from the word cœur, which means heart in French. So courage, which also is connected, courage, comes from the word cœur, and cœur is about the heart. And we need this love. We need as human beings to feel this love. And when we don't get it when we're a child, it's so damaging because then we don't know how to give it to ourselves. And instead what we do is we perpetuate the behavior that was given to us, such as the criticism and the abuse and whatever it is. We just keep doing that to ourselves instead. But if you think about it, how does it feel if somebody every day was to, wake you up in the morning and say, oh, you're a really horrible person, you're really ugly, you're really fat, you're really stupid, you're really this, you're really that. How does that feel? It doesn't feel good, and yet we do it to ourselves. And often we don't recognize that we're doing it to ourselves, but we're doing it to ourselves all the time. We've got to grow self-love. So how would you rate your self-love? Just intuitively. How much do you think you love yourself? And probably I could almost, say that even if we think we're doing a good job, there's still a better job that we could be doing. And I know that for myself because it happens bit by bit that we can love ourselves more. The last step is we have to introduce and practice de-stressing strategies and techniques on a regular basis. That means we have to do things like yoga, qigong, etc., etc. We have to do it. We have to learn mindful de-stressing practices to retrain our body that it's safe to be relaxed, to retrain ourselves back into the calm response. We must do this. And this is one of the things that I found is that even though I did all the other even the first 3 steps, and I'll recap in a minute what they are, even though I was doing them, it wasn't enough. I had to introduce these other practices, and it's what I see with all my clients. They can do as much of the other stuff as they want, but if they don't start bringing in de-stressing techniques, it's not enough. There's not a complete de-stress or eradication. So how much do you do de-stressing protocol? How much, what do you do on a daily basis to de-stress? And I'm not talking the changes in the habits and the healing the past and the trauma. I'm not talking that stuff. I'm talking what activities do you do that literally put your body back into that relaxation response. So the summary, step 1, assess awareness, assess the setup, the whole of our life, understand the physiology of stress. Step 2, identify and deal with internal, external stressors. That's a big one. There's a lot in there. That's all the healing the past, changing our patterns, changing our habits, dealing with people, dealing with situations. There's a lot in there. Actually, no, I put those 2 together. So 3, heal the past, change our lifestyle habits, change patterns of consciousness. 4, grow self-love. 5, implement and practice de-stressing techniques. That's the 5-step method. And as I said, it's not overnight. And I don't know if in New Zealand we had an ad about 20 years ago, Rachel Hunter, it won't happen overnight, but it will happen. It was for a shampoo. So this does not happen overnight, and it's really important that you know this, because otherwise we get false expectations of what is possible. And that is actually one of the most stressful things, is to want something to be different than it is, or to want something to happen at a certain deadline or in a certain amount of time. And then we get really stressed and frustrated when it doesn't happen. And one of the biggest things that I can, or pieces of advice that I can give to anybody who's dealing with a chronic illness, is let go of the deadline of how long it's going to take to get well, because the body doesn't work like that. We get well when we're no longer doing what is damaging the body, and also when we heal enough of the past that energy, that traumatic, emotional, stressful energy is no longer locked in the cells. That is when we get well. And when our body believes us enough that we've made enough substantial change, that we're no longer damaging ourselves through our unhealthy behaviors of running around, working 60 hours a week, back-to-backing our appointments, just always being, whatever it is that we're doing that's perpetuating stress, we have to prove to our body that we're not going to do it anymore, and then it won't need to send the illness anymore and the stress anymore. But we have to prove it to our body. It's super intelligent, and we can't lie to it. It knows the truth. And please bear in mind that some of these questions would require a much deeper discussion, getting, lots of personal information from somebody, understanding their patterns. In other words, normally for me to really fully answer these questions, I would have had to have that first session with the person, this private session, to get all the detail from that person about their life. And then I can really, quite easily help that person. So just bear in mind that either I can only give a generalized answer because I don't know you personally, or your situation, or your history, or I may say, you know what, that actually I can't even answer that. It's just too in-depth. It would take half an hour, and maybe you need a one-to-one conversation, so I just can't really answer that. So question was, if I'm triggered by a partner, how do I pull myself out of the stress response and into the relaxation response so I can continue healing? So I would say that basically if we're being triggered by a partner, it's because our stuff, inverted commas, is being triggered, whatever that stuff is. So we need to find out what is that stuff that is continually being, what are those buttons that keep continually getting pushed? And really we're going to have to do a lot of the work that I've talked about in the 5 steps, to be quite honest, in order to do that. And we're going to also have to learn, which I'll be teaching in the 6-week program. Again, as I said, I couldn't put everything on that page. But we're going to need to learn how to communicate effectively with our partner so that we feel heard and that we know that we've spoken our truth and that we're speaking our truth safely and effectively. We have to learn safe and effective communication. We have to learn how to communicate our feelings. We have to learn how to communicate our needs. That is very important. And we also need to look deeper at the patterns inside of us. So I'll give you an example, which isn't a partner example, but it gives an example of what I'm talking about here. Is I remember a few years ago, I had a flatmate, and I was feeling very frustrated, so we could say triggered, right? I was feeling very frustrated because I felt like I was doing all the housework and I was also bringing in all the wood, for the fire. And he was never at home and he wasn't doing anything. And I was feeling frustrated and we could say stressed, right? Now, if I'd done nothing about that, then that frustration and stress would have continued. But because I know that that's just not how I operate anymore, because once you become aware, you can't be unaware, I decided that I needed to say something. So I decided that I was going to tell him how I felt and what I needed. So I literally told him how I was feeling and asked him for more help. Now that was good. That had a result. So that's one step. But the other point was that I realized that the reason I was getting triggered wasn't actually because of him. He was just triggering something in me that was already in me, and he just happened to be the person triggering it. It could have been anybody, but it was him. And when I deep dived into myself, which is what I call going from the surface to the deep, I discovered that it felt very similar to how I felt when I was a child growing up. And I had to do lots and lots of housework at home, and my brother never got to do anything because my brother was mentally handicapped and he never got given chores. And so I was feeling really, really frustrated, and as we say in England, hard done by, because I was given all these chores and he didn't get anything. So you see, what was happening was I was actually really getting triggered by something from the past that had not been healed. So this is why I say that if you're getting triggered, you have to look at what is really underneath. Why are my buttons being pushed? And this is what we call the patterns of consciousness and the unconscious beliefs. And we have to look at that. So that would be my short response on that. Guilt, the feeling of ought to and should do. Please go into the program. I talk about that in the 12 days program, so I won't answer that here. Allowing emotions to pass through, not get tangled up and reacted to them. Yes, we have to learn how to process emotions, and I'll be teaching a very simple technique to do that on the program. Again, not something that I can do here, but we just have to learn techniques for feeling our emotions. And the main thing to understand about emotions is that emotions are irrational and thoughts are rational. And emotions cannot be thought away. And this is what a lot of people are trying to do, is they're trying to think their emotions away, and it doesn't work because emotions are irrational and thoughts are rational. And the thing that emotions want is to be acknowledged without judgment. We must acknowledge and accept how we're feeling. If we try and push them away, what we resist persists. We cannot just push them away. It doesn't work. So we have to learn how to acknowledge them, how to feel our emotions without thinking we're going to die, right? Because as a child, that's what we thought would happen. We thought we might die. So we've got to learn that it's safe to feel our feelings. And in the Emotional Health Transformation Program, I go deep into that. And the next one, grounding, calming, centering. So again, in the 12 days program, there are grounding, calming, centering techniques, and we will be doing more on the 6-week program. Next question, how to stay stress-free in a busy or noisy environment and city traffic. Again, this will be very much the practice, and the daily practice of de-stressing exercises will really help with that. And also, the more we clear our emotional trauma from the past, the more we're not going to be, the less we're going to be triggered by that sort of stuff. Trying to work it out, it being most anything and everything, including what people think. That's a sign that we're stuck in the head, that we're in our head brain and we're not connected enough perhaps in our body, and we're trying to work everything out with our head rather than utilizing our heart brain and our gut brain, and we'll be talking about that in the 6-week program as well. We need to learn how to tune in and use and align our 3 brains. It's very fascinating stuff.